everyone. Before we get started with FECast episode 45, Boring is Good, just a couple quick shout outs. First of all, a huge thanks to our editor, SRFS. I think I finally said the name right for the first time ever, who puts in a lot of time editing FECast and getting it out to everyone. And second, of course, a huge thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com who make FECast possible week in, week out. So thanks to these lovely people, Cotillion, Ryder, Alcide Bava, Work Done Son, Chamomile, Chrissier, D-Dub, and Yeast Out. Thank you so much for supporting FECast and letting us continue to do this. Finally, if you're not already a part of the Friends of Eternal Discord, it is the best place to get prepared for tournaments and get better at Eternal. Link is in the description. It's full of top-level tournament players and just a lot of the competitive players in Eternal. I think for the Throne Championship, I don't have numbers for Expedition, but for the Throne Championship, 34 of the top 64 players were in the Friends of Eternal Discord, so strongly recommend it. All right, without any further ado, let's get started with FECast episode 45, Boring is Good, with guest Schaab. Hello everyone and welcome to FECast episode 45, Boring is Good. I am your host Sunyveil, and today we have a guest for the first time in a while. This is the author of a number of excellent limited articles on letstalklimited.wordpress.com. We are honored to welcome Schaab onto the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a pretty new listener to the show, but I love the content that I've listened to so far, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, I definitely love your content also. And along for the ride, as always, is the person who is playing the absolute biggest match of his life when it comes to card games in just a few days, and that is Stormblessed. Welcome back, and good luck this weekend.
Yeah, yes, it's Stormblessed here, as always. And this weekend, I don't remember which date it is. I think it's Saturday or Sunday. I have the top 8 draft. You know, it's been a month in the making, since about a month, that we had to postpone the top 8 draft. And so, you know, there's been so many weeks between then and now, between, you know, like I meant like for Sunday, you know, he had like 30 minutes to an hour between his top 4 match into his finals, where he just had, you know, boom, boom, boom. For me, it's been like just this long descent. I don't know what word there is, but yes, it's been a long time in the making, and I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, hopefully Schaab can help you out with that. All right. Today we're going to be talking about the Expedition Championship this past weekend, which was won by Ronin X. And then after that, we'll be talking about draft with our guest. So let's go over the Expedition Championship. It was a very wide open tourney, and nevertheless, 2 of the same faction combinations met in the finals. It was Time Justice Shadow, but they were very different decks. So the winning deck, Ronin X, was playing a control build, a Control-y Stranger build. There were a few Travers farms along with Grodov Stranger, Makar Stranger, and were there other Strangers? I don't remember. But it also played a full suite of Backbreakers, and it was playing Shenra Speaks. And on the other side, we had an extremely innovative deck by Cravian, which was packing 4 Archmagister's Portal, which is the relic that says whenever you play a unit that doesn't have the same name as any other unit in your deck or something, deck, void, and hand.
And so Archmagister's Portal is a card that says if you, whenever you play a unit, if it doesn't share a name with cards in your hand, deck, and void, you gets +2/+2. What that effectively means is that you have to play either all singleton cards, because as soon as you have 2 Sandstorm Titans anywhere in your game, it doesn't get the buff, or cards like Crack the Earth, where you should play multiples of. The first one you play will get the buff. Future ones will not, but the first one will. Now, that card has a lot of downsides, namely that it means you have to play a singleton deck. But what I was really impressed by what Cravian's innovative deck building was, is they added 4 restrained action to the deck, which both enabled some extreme consistency. And if you get both, you get, you know, this insane burst of every turn getting a free unit that you get to pick, which is the best for the board state, and it gets +2/+2. as well as, if you have a bunch of one-ofs, having restrained action means you get to pick the one-ofs you want better. And then on top of that, what having the 2 of those cards meant is that you got to play Calibrate, which allowed you to dig for those 2 cards. So I was very much impressed by the deck building. I still think there were a number of cards that I wouldn't have played, like Rage Heart Paladin. I would have played like Lumen Defender over it. But overall, very impressed by the deck.
Yeah, I have to agree with basically everything that you said. I didn't actually get to catch too much of the cast this past weekend, but just by looking at the deck lists, it seemed like it was one heck of a ride.
Hi everyone, this is your editor, SRFS. Just a quick note, Cravian's Portal deck was built by a user named Drosla. The deck list link is in the show's description. And now, back to the cast.
So something worth noting is that there were only 3 Awakening cards between the 160 cards that the finalists played. And they were not the ones that you would have guessed, I think. So the restrained action deck that Cravian was playing had Dr. Zitrum, Word of Power, and Silver Knight, the last 2 being in the market, and the other deck had none. So that means that the last 2 tournaments we've had since the release of Awakening, neither of the winning decks have had any Awakening cards in them, which I think is, I think that's a good sign, because the cards are like in Awakening are definitely seeing a lot of play. It's not like they're terrible, but I think it's a good place for the format to be in.
Yeah, I mean, as I wrote in our notes that we did see other Awakening cards in other decks. There were 148 total Awakening cards, like including 4 of copies and market copies in the top 64 at all, right? With Geralt, Kira, Allhead, and Dazzle taking up the vast majority of those with 138 copies between the 4 of them. And so I think it's fine if the Awakening doesn't show up in the top winning deck. It was in other decks. It was a small bundle, not like if it was a set 10 and nothing showed up in the top 2 decks, I would be a little surprised by what Direwolf had done. But as is, I think this is a fine place to be for the format. So from a casual perspective, I'm curious to hear what Schaab's thoughts on the winning decks are, especially the Portal deck.
Well, I actually can probably only speak about the Portal deck because I really loved that deck so much. I had the tournament coverage on, just on my phone, and every once in a while I would check it out. And I picked up my phone and I saw this deck being played with the 2-mana 1/1 that plunders and silences when it dies, Solemn Clergy. And I'm like, what am I even looking at? And as one, it's just a thing that I love about these games is that somebody can do that, like take this crazy build that no one else is playing, and find success with it. I will never be that player. That's not something that I'm ever going to do. I'll just always take whatever I think is the best deck. But I love that decks like Cravian's exist, and you can be successful with them. And as soon as I could, like, I found that deck list and I just ran it through the gauntlet because I thought it looked so great. So I thought the gameplay was pretty excellent, and as somebody who doesn't play Constructed at all, I probably will for a shot at Worlds for next month. But yeah, I enjoyed watching it a lot, and I was super impressed by the creativity of Cravian's list.
Yeah, so beyond the top 2 decks, though, we had an exceptionally diverse metagame, especially considering the last few tournaments we've had. Petition and Annihilate were the only cards to show up with more than 100 copies in the top 64, with Petition obviously being factionless and a Seek Power equivalent, so like you might expect there to be a bunch of them. And Annihilate was, I think, like 119 copies, a removal spell, a versatile removal spell to be found in a variety of decks. As far as that goes, the next most common card was Blightmoth at 75 copies, and Blightmoth just also fits into a variety of decks, right? It's sort of a removal interaction spell, but also fits into these sacrifice decks, which we saw a couple of. So an exceptionally diverse metagame. And I also just wanted to, point out to Sunny for a second that Geralt was the most common Awakening card at 37 copies, 1 over Kira at 36. You bad-mouthing Geralt, Sunny.
Yeah, okay. If anyone thinks that Geralt is the reason why it's more popular than Kira and not Helio, please tweet at me. I expect 0 notifications with regards to this. All right, so yeah, there were a lot of great, interesting decks that people were playing, and it's great to see such a diverse field, and yet like the creativity that Cravian had paying off. Another deck that we didn't get to see over the course of the weekend was a Chinese characters deck. their screen name is all Chinese characters, and I don't know enough Chinese in order to be able to tell you what it means. But they top 64'd, and they did it with a deck that has 50 power in it, 50 power in the main deck, and 4 Den of Ordeals. So I guess the idea is to play Den of Ordeals and play the End is Near to put a bunch of power in your Void, and then play Katra in order to get a ton of power back, I guess. I don't, like, how much power are you realistically getting back from this deck? Anyway, I believe Stormblessed bested it in round 1, and I don't know how it works, but definitely the fact that someone qualified with it is very intriguing, because it is... Well, I've never seen anything like it. I got a little hyped that might be the Powers deck that I alluded to in a few episodes back, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just a World Pyre deck.
It's a deck that exists in Eternal. It's an work of art, but also like a garbage fire. So I did face it round 1, and I can see how it could get there. Not necessarily. I think the person had to get the buys, though. I do believe they probably got the buys. I don't know how they got to like rank 9 or whatever without the buys with this deck, but I would have, like, a non-open deck list, if it was just on like the Swiss rounds, whatever, I would have probably kept like my first hand in game 1 and then got run over because I didn't keep it like a proactive hand, right? I kept a hand with like a draw, 3-time sigil, probably primal sigils, and like a primal etching, right? Just like a generic like a from elements, right? Where it's like a generically good hand, but against this matchup, it would have just been like completely off. Like I mulliganed to 6 and ended up with a hand of like double Wump and like a Helio and just like ran them over because I kept a hand with that had aggression plus some refueling. The deck is absurd. You should take a look at it. For some reason, it's playing like Seed of Creation. Like what? It's playing a Seed of, like Schaab. I know that you know this card draft. It's Seed of Creation. Like Seed of Creation. Like playing 2 Shenron Speaks of Seed of Creation. Like the deck is just full of nonsensical combos where it's like, I'm gonna play 8 of the Huru into Rhymeskill Draconis to permanently permafrost everything. I played it on ladder. I went 1-4, lost to every aggro deck. It's a weird deck.
Well, I love that this deck exists. Just like Cravian's deck, I will never be the one to pilot it, but I love that it's something people can do.
Yeah, so beyond that, just to clarify, because we can't really speak what Sonny did because I think he skipped out in this tournament. As for TBC and myself, we took what I call 3-minute Elysian, because I built the deck in 3 minutes, and we swapped out Dairy Cathane for Maveloth Huntress, and replaced like 2 market cards, and we ran the deck as is, just changing 6 cards. Otherwise, the deck was built in literally 3 minutes. But it's not really built in 3 minutes, because the only reason that it could be built in those 3 minutes is that I've literally built dozens, if not hundreds, of the Elysian deck before over like multiple formats. So like I knew roughly how I wanted to build the deck, right? So I just knew like I'm gonna put these in, I'm gonna put Drawl in instead of like Master Conjure, and I'm gonna fit Dazzle in. But other than that, it was like, I just put in the cards that I knew I liked in my Elysian deck. So like I knew how to build the deck, so it was easy to build. And the deck I thought was great. If you want to take a fun interactive deck to ladder, it's a really fun Elysian build. There's a lot of gameplay to it. It's playing a lot of powerful 2-drops, and you're gonna play some really fun cards.
That sounds right up my alley. Elysian, 2-drops, sold.
I mean, you hit Drawl, Wump, and Mom, and Huntress. As like 16 really powerful 2-drops. It's a very fun deck. Back up with Dazzle.
I actually have been running an Elysian, like... Well, I went into the not the Farming Eternal Discord, the Friends of Eternal Discord, and I asked you guys, hey, are even-handed golems like decks still good? And people said no. So I built one anyway because I just couldn't resist. Like, you guys have been playing with this card forever. I never get to draw 2 cards for 2 power. So I've been playing this even-handed golem Helio Elysian deck in like just like the Throne Gauntlet, and it got me to I think I'm Diamond right now in Throne. It's maybe I'll send it to you guys so you can take a look. But it is like very much my style is the Elysian like Wump and Mizo, Jaral. Sign me up. Sounds good.
Yeah, I know that we're not really focused on Throne currently, but I do think Even Golem is probably still fine in Throne. Like, I don't think it's going to be the tier 1 thing to do anymore, but I think it's probably still going to be tier 2 in a variety of ways. Even Paladins is never going to be a deck in my mind, but even Elysian's still probably a deck, or just even time decks in general.
Even Paladins, I haven't thought about that in a long time. Jeez, such bad memories. Why am I getting destroyed by such a trash deck? For the record,
Oh,
I don't actually think that is trash. I just like, it took me a while to comprehend how the deck was able to function. So Schaab, you take limited a lot more seriously than constructed. What are your thoughts about the skill and variance balance that there is in constructed versus limited?
Well, I mean, I don't play enough constructed to speak to like the variance difference between the two formats. But I did hop on Reddit the other day to see the constructed players talking about constructed things. Yeah, Reddit's bad for my mental health, but I did take that plunge, and I read an argument about Kira and the deck, and whether you can do it on autopilot, what level of skill it takes to pilot that deck. And as somebody who played competitive Magic for a few years, I feel like this is an argument that's as old as card games. Like how much of it is play skill versus just going on autopilot, like letting the cards do your work for you. And I think that I just kind of wanted to throw my 2 cents in as a primarily draft player. When I watched the tournaments, because I do watch, like I watched the Expedition one, and I caught some of the Throne one and saw the finals. Like the play that I'm seeing is high level play. Like the second that I think RNG or variance determines outcomes more than skill in this game, I'll stop writing about it. So if you see me continuing to produce content, then I am very much in the camp that this is a game that is far more determined by skill than variance, but that it's really tough for people to see, because when you get to a level where you're like really good, the edges between the really good and the great players are really small. And sometimes really great players lose to good players because of a slight amount of variance. But I think that the amount that people will say that like variance or just luck will determine outcomes more than skill, I don't think that's true. I don't see that in like the games that I watch on coverage. And when I am in the Discord and I listen to people talk about, their last 2 or 3 cards and why they might, one might be better than another, like that is where your advantages come from. And I think that if you say like, oh, the deck's really easy to play, it doesn't take a very high skill level, you are really limiting how good you will ever be at this game, or games like it, if that's how you approach a format or a tournament. So I just kind of want to throw in my 2 cents that on the side of whether or not the game is like skill or RNG or variance, the games that I'm seeing look like they're being played extremely well. I've played quite a bit of card games, and I can't plug and play that Kira deck into Gauntlet. It has a lot of hard decisions. Yeah. Let me do something about her. Sorry.
For those of you wondering, we are being greeted by Schaab's husky.
While Schaab was going, I'll just say that as far as variance goes, I hate when my opponents just like they top deck the Queen of Spades, or like they just always have the 1914 rookie Babe Ruth card on top of their deck. It's the worst.
What the heck is that?
Are one of you a sports ball fan and the other one is not?
And Stormblessed, you're a sports fan also, right? Just not as much as me?
Sometimes. Definitely not as much as Sunny.
Yeah. I follow baseball very closely. I could probably give you the wins above replacement stat for like most players that are well known within 10 or something. So yeah. I pay a lot of attention to baseball.
Yeah, I used to be big into fantasy sports as well, and my favorite part was the draft then as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of parallels. Anyway, what you were saying earlier, there's a lot to unpack. I think, first of all, I'm already on record saying a million times that I have no sympathy for people who call games brainless. Like, I mean, there's just a lot going on there. And I think that a lot of it has to do with people's memories and how good they are at recognizing and remembering things that happen in the game that might be really small. Like, first of all, you have to be able to see the difference between two possibilities that might at the time seem like there's no big deal. But then you also have to remember it like 6 turns later after a million things have happened and you've made a ton of really complicated decisions. So like those things, I think a lot of people gloss over those as decision points and opportunities to greatly impact the outcome of the game. And it just goes overlooked. Another thing you said, which was that sometimes a great player will lose to a good player. Well, there's also the possibility that the great player just plays poorly for that game. I mean, I not to toot my horn too much, but like I've done pretty well in Eternal, and yet there are some times where I play and I just think that I'm an utter moron.
22 cough 22 day twos cough.
Yeah, I mean, that okay, whatever. But there are definitely times where I just play so poorly, I just cannot understand how I make that play, and there are times where I'm just totally on my game, and that difference in how well you play for that whatever time period, whether it be a tournament or a game or a match, can also lead to great so-called great players losing to so-called good players.
I will toot your horn a little bit, Sonny, as awkward as that sounds, but as somebody who does not know you and just learned about the history of Eternal tournaments about an hour ago, the fact that you have so many more, that's not luck. So I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this to people. So I think you're completely right about sample sizes. And I may have missed it. Do you ever cover confirmation bias?
I don't think I've spoken to it specifically, but I mean, it's a really important. When you're dealing with card games, you have to deal with all sorts of biases, right? And confirmation is one of the ones that you really have to look out for. You're basically trying to extrapolate a small amount of data and make conclusions based off of that, and biases are going to get in the way a ton for that. And I know that happens with myself all the time. Like, I think Monoprimal is terrible, so that's actually the deck I forced myself to play for this tournament because I just felt like I needed a greater appreciation of it. Because for whatever reason, this goes back to Magic too. Like, even when Mono Blue was the best deck and I should have played it at the PT, I didn't. And yeah, like I just have certain biases that are really deep seated and need to get rid of them. But anyway, why don't you go ahead and continue before I derail you too far?
So confirmation bias is basically your brain is hardwired to pay attention to information that supports a view you already believe. So let's say I'm a person who believes the Kira deck is busted and it's brainless and you can just run it on autopilot. Say they watch Sonny play 5 games, and in 4 of them, he makes really interesting, complex decisions, and in 1 of them, he just curves out and crushes somebody. They'll remember that last game and say, yeah, see, I told you, this thing is brainless, and completely forget all of the other games that did require proper sequencing. And sequencing is one thing that I also think people don't pay enough attention to. Like, they'll pay a lot of attention to a single turn, but not all of the things that a player did 3 turns before that gave them the opportunity to get lucky 3 turns later. So confirmation bias, just being aware of it, like I think of it all the time for limited. If I want cards to be good, I will remember every time that they're good, and cards that I'm convinced are bad. Reckless Minibot, the 3/2 with Reckless that I just never put in my deck. Like, every time that card beats me, I'm just like, oh, what a fluke, like that can't just happen over and over again. So being aware that you have certain preferences or certain things that you already believe, your brain is going to remember the things that already support that. You have to actively look for the things that don't match the view you already hold. So I think that there's a lot of confirmation bias. Like, if you think like, yeah, the Kira deck is busted and it's brainless and it just does super powerful things. Yeah, you're going to see games where that happens. Like, yes, because it's a really powerful deck and there's going to be times where it just goes smoothly. And people will say, see, like, there you go. But they'll forget all of the complicated decisions that were made. And like, I ran the deck through on Throne and on the Gauntlet, and I stopped running it through because when I run the Gauntlet, I just kind of want to play like mono time, just crush, and I was like, I don't want to sequence these choices. Like, so as somebody who doesn't play constructed, but I've won my 10,000 games in Eternal. Like, I know how to sequence things. If it's brainless, it certainly wasn't brainless to me. Like, you can do very powerful things. Like, if you were just to run the deck and goldfish it and play solitaire, yeah, you could do incredibly powerful things. But if you want to play it optimally, it's not at all brainless. It's very complex. At least that was my experience with that one deck.
Yes. So from my experience with the Kira deck, from just a brief personal example, like my first 10 games with Kira, I was like 50-50. I went like 6-4 or 4-6. And I was like, wow, this deck's not as good as people say it is. And then like for my next 20, I was like 15-5. Like I started going like winning a lot because it turns out that the deck has like incredible numbers and wins. Like starting from turn 2, the deck just has so many decisions you have to make every turn. So, the deck is just has a lot of decisions. Like, is it potentially too powerful? Should Bubble Shield maybe go to 2 cost? Maybe, but to say that it's brainless is just a silly statement.
Yeah, Schaab brings up an excellent point about confirmation bias and does a great job of illustrating it. I think that was a very good explanation. And if you want to learn more tidbits of wisdom, then you can check out Schaab's articles. And 2 of them that I want to talk about today are Draft Boring Decks and Quadrant Theory. Now, these 2 I am pretty familiar with from my time playing MTG. Drafting Boring Decks is a seminal article by Ben Stark, who, if you don't know, is considered to be one of the greatest limited players of all time in Magic, and that is some incredible competition that he has to be up against. He's just an unbelievable limited player, and has played in Pro Tours since forever. I don't know like when he started playing, but he was definitely a Pro Tour mainstay when I started following professional Magic 10 years ago. Holy cow. Anyway, so in this article, it talks about going for the 2-1 decks, being boring and not going for the multi-faction card first, not going for the really interesting, difficult to put together synergies, and instead just drafting decks that are solid, good reading signals, and trying to get a deck that is on average a 2-1 deck.
Yeah, so Ben Stark, just as a little side, I think he made his first Pro Tour at like 16 or something like that. So he played very young and then, has been on the Pro Tour forever. But I wrote Be Boring because to kind of give newer players, or not even newer players, but newer drafters kind of a how-to guide. Because I think people approach what is usually referred to as drafting the easy way, which is you take the rare and then whatever color that's in, you just continue to take cards in that color. You take a Justice card first, you take a Primal card second, and then those are just your 2 colors. That's not a great way to approach draft. One of the big reasons it's not a great way is that people have this misconception that 1, the rares are all that matters, or that 2, you need your deck to do super powerful things to win games of limited. And this comes back to what we were talking about with confirmation bias and how it's really hard sometimes to see the small decisions that lead to either your wins or your losses. Like, it's really easy when you lose to a bomb rare to be like, yep, that's the reason that I lost. It's much harder to notice when your opponents are just going 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop, and just killing you every time with that. So I wrote Be Boring and it's time to draft the hard way in Eternal, because I feel like the way Eternal Draft is set up it's for players like me, for sure. So I played Magic for a couple of years. I played Constructed because that's what the tournaments were, but Limited is, I just love to draft, and I already knew how to do it. And if you already know how to draft, like you come from Magic, you know how to build a deck, you can clean up pretty nicely in the Eternal Draft queues. When I just started drafting, I'm playing against players who they're building their first draft deck, and I've built, a few hundred. So, I build a lot of 6-7 win deck lists. But if you don't know how to draft, like when Argent Depths first came out and I was preparing for the draft tournament, I was just going 0-3, 0-3. I had to keep pouring resources to keep drafting. And I was like, this is terrible. But that's what a lot of people's experience is like when they're newer. And so I wrote what I considered to just kind of be blueprints that we're not really doing anything fancy. We're not going for the 3-0 every single time. It's like the people at the top of the leaderboards, we're kind of in on the joke. Like, you don't have to do anything extraordinary. You just have to put together something functional.
If I may interject for a second, so the
Yeah.
concept of a 3-0 and a 2-1 comes from Magic parlance, where in Magic it's more like the top 64 event, where you basically play you get 3 matches and your goal is you don't need to win all 3, you just need to win 2 of the 3, right? So in Eternal Draft Queue, that would be sort of equivalent to being like, I'm going to accept a 5-3 finish, right? If you're like I don't need to draft a 7-0 deck, I'm okay with drafting, a 5-3 deck or a 4-3 deck. I'm going to call that still a successful draft, right? If you say 5-3 is a good draft, then if that's like your target, you're going to get there more often if you only want to get 7-0s, is what Schaab is saying.
Thank you for putting that a different way. Yeah. If you are always going for the 9 out of 10, you are going to end up with a lot of like 3s or 4s. If you intend to draft just like 7s, you're going to end up with 8s or 9s just when things go your way. Sometimes you draft the hard way. And what I mean by drafting the hard way is just a couple of points about it is you take cards early in the draft that have the highest chance to make your deck. So you want cards that go, if we could first pick Annihilate, you would always want to do that. Oni Battle Driver, it's a red card, it's a single splash. So you want to take cards that aren't 2 colors that go in the most decks possible to maximize the chance that you play your first few picks. And the amount that drafting the hard way and reading the signals, so figuring out what the person next to you is not drafting, different formats reward it differently. And I don't know that we're currently in the most rewarding format for drafting the hard way. But I would say we still...
I actually, sorry to direct again, but I actually think we are in a format that's pretty rewarding for drafting the hard way in many ways. I mean, it's kind of difficult because there are a number of like highly polarizing cards in pack 1 and 4 that are exceptionally good. But the fact that the packs 2 and 3 are so empty means that drafting the hard way and finding the open path will be really good. When packs are low on playable count, that's when drafting the hard way is better, because even though you lose out on some early picks, gaining the later picks is so much more valuable.
Yeah, I don't think that you're ever really punished for drafting the hard way. Like, it's good for a reason. It's good and it's hard for a reason. It makes you think really critically about your decisions.
Well, I compared, so when Argent Depths came out, so I had just played a bunch of Echoes of Eternity, and I don't really think that was a drafting the hard way format. So Andre Strosky, another Pro Tour champion, excellent Magic player, wrote an article about drafting the medium way. And drafting the medium way is you become proficient in the 2 to 3 best archetypes in a format, and then you just draft the one that is most open in your seat. And with Echoes, I've felt that was probably a better way to draft, was you just needed to know the 2 or 3 best archetypes, and then you could pick which one was most open.
Echoes was that weird like 4-faction, 5-faction mess where it's like just pick the best card in the pack, right? We're just like, yeah, you can just play everything because you got so much fixing, right? That was that format?
Yeah. Like yes. So I was losing to, the players in the top 20, the top 100, because my decks were just too fair. Like, I was drafting these 2-color decks with 2 drops and a little bit of interaction and just getting crushed by these like 5-color piles. And I was like, what is going on? And what was going on is you could just draft time always and just put a few powerful pieces around this core, and it would pretty much always come together. So I found that was more of a drafting the medium way format. And then Argent Depths prior to the pack changes, I thought was just so excellent. That's kind of what inspired me to write It's Time to Draft the Hard Way in Eternal, was because I felt like drafting the hard way was so rewarding in Magic. And the way that I've thought of it now is it was like a level up I had to give back. When I started drafting in Eternal, I was like, well, this isn't like reading signal. Like, I didn't really understand how asynchronous draft worked. I was like, this isn't really reading signals the same way that I do in Magic. I'm just kind of putting together really powerful pieces. But then when Argent Depths came out and there were all these different archetypes and there were, like pack 2, pick 10, like that choice would still matter. It wouldn't just be looking for playables. It would be choosing between 2 playables and which one goes best in my current deck and what one goes best in my current deck, also considering what was open in pack 1 and what I might see in pack 4. So drafting the hard way, I think will always be beneficial. But there are some formats where I think it's more rewarding than others.
I know this is something that was said a while back, but I think it's worth mentioning. When we say draft the 2-1 deck and don't go for the 3-0s, I think the reason why you do that, it doesn't mean that, like, if you're trying to draft the 5-3 deck every time, it doesn't mean you'll never go 7-0. In fact, you might go 7-0 or get to 7 wins. Sorry, I'm screwing up my analogies all over the place. It might mean that you get to 7 wins more often than if you're going for those jackpot decks where everything is just like really synergistic and you have to have all the right pieces. It's a matter of, well, okay, so I think that if you just aim to raise your average, then that will, rise the entire tide of your winning percentage, if that makes any sense. Like if you just try to be consistent and boring basically and drafting the hard way, then you're more likely to get those 7-win drafts, even if your deck isn't as good as some of the times where you just cruise to 7 wins because your deck is busted, if that makes sense. Like, it just means that your winning percentage is on average better, and you're just going to have times where you just run into a good string of draws and get to 7 wins anyway. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah.
That was...
Yeah, and one other thing about it is that when you draft these kind of boring decks, what it allows you to do is play more games, and these games are really hard to get good at, and they're impossible to become better at if you're just casting the only card in your hand that you can cast. So not only, will you get to crush all of the people who aren't building boring decks and are trying to do ridiculous things, I think you have to just start drafting and playing a lot more games to see how impactful it is to just go like 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop.
Yeah.
And when your opponent doesn't do that, you win that game most of the time. But I do want to say that I think the approach that I've laid out, like be boring, just fill out your curve, try not to take conditional cards. I think that's a good recipe for making it to Masters. Like if that is your goal, I think the be boring approach is a good way to do it. I did include, I don't remember which article it was in, a section on bending and breaking the rules, because eventually you have to take that next step. Like, because if you just, like I was just building boring decks, and then I was getting crushed by the people in the top 20. Like, these games were not close. So I knew all the rules for Magic, all the rules that I've written about. I knew them, I applied them, and I got to the point where they weren't good enough anymore. And my goal was to be in the top 20 for however many months I needed to be to get my 80 points. So yeah, I just applied the rules and I would make it to Masters and maybe like in the top 50, just building boring decks, have a curve, make sure your creatures can attack and block, combat tricks, removal, basic boring stuff. But then you have to move past that. Like, eventually you have to learn which of those rules you can bend and which ones you can break. And the only way to do it is that I know of really is you have to draft a lot of decks. Like, you have to build a lot of decks. I try to give people heuristics and guidelines that they can apply. But the truth is sometimes, like, you look at a build and you just know, like, which of my draft decks do I put a Stand Strong in? It's a bad card. It's slow. It's a Justice card. It's 2 power. You get +3/+3 and Exalted. It's a bad card. You shouldn't put it in most of your draft decks. But there's some draft decks that I put it in, and I just kind of know, like, when that is, and that comes with time. So you can have success as a drafter just building the boring decks. And something that Ben Stark talks about is even if you go against somebody who has a better deck than you, you're only a 45% like dog in that matchup. So I think if you're newer to draft, like you want to get into draft and you don't want to just go 0-3, be boring is a great way to approach it. Eventually you will have to learn to break those rules a little bit.
So speaking of both being boring and also the draft championship, how did tell us a little bit about how your draft, the top, I believe you said you got 80 points. So how did your draft in the top 64 go?
I had high hopes. I started taking screenshots because it was right after I had just started writing. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to screenshot my draft and do like a write-up on it. And if it goes well, and I think I abandoned that after maybe 6 picks because it became like all of my mental energy really just had to be focused on the draft because the signals really were not clear to me. I ended up with an Elysian deck, and I guess I'll talk about this a little bit. I really try not to focus on the aspects of the game that I can't change if I'm frustrated by them, because that's just not your energy is just not well spent thinking about those things. But I will talk about this a little bit because I think that it's so important. So I think the draft pack changes, like they changed 2 weeks before the championship, and then for about a week, you you can't read signals in draft after they change things because apparently people rare draft the packs. I'm still like getting to know how all of this works, but so I didn't really play after the format changed for like that first week because it wasn't a real, you don't get a real sense of what the format is. And so then I had about a week to prepare this kind of new format in the draft championship. And a week for me is basically 2 days. It's only Thursday, Friday. So um, so I played a few games in this new format, but I didn't know how to draft fire decks. Like I was comfortable drafting fire decks in the previous format, but it's not the kind of thing like with constructed. If I were preparing for a constructed tournament, whatever deck I was planning to play, like I just would have jammed that deck Thursday and Friday. But with draft, like you can't just decide to draft a bunch of fire decks because you won't get a good sample of what they're supposed to look like or what they look like when you're supposed to draft them.
So the
In
reason is that you can't just draft fire decks is because fire is a very bad faction in the current draft format. I would not recommend drafting fire.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It's certainly not my thing. But in pack 2, so I thought time was open in pack 1. And it wasn't like overly clear, I was basing that on what I'd seen in like picks 10 to 15. And then I think I took Helio, pack 1, pick 2, and then a few picks later I had the option of the 7/4 dragon. I think it's the Hellkite. And all of your creatures deal damage to the opponent when it ETBs. And I kind of had this moment in my draft where I was like I'm so frustrated because I think fire is the most is the color I'm supposed to be in right now, and I don't know how to draft that deck. Like I don't know how it's supposed to come together. I don't know what pieces like are most important. Because when you really know how to build a draft deck, you know that some things are core and you absolutely need, and some things are a luxury. And so I wasn't confident in that. And so that was kind of my decision point. But there was like this minute where I just sat there like, you have got to be kidding me that I put all of these months into this draft championship. And now the deck I think I'm supposed to the draft, I don't know how to do it, because the format had just changed so recently. So I let myself be like really frustrated about that for like a minute. And then I let it go. And I just jumped back into the draft and tried to make the best choices that I could. And so I decided to go, even though I thought that fire looked like the most open color, time was pretty open in pack 1, and I ended up with just a fair Elysian deck. Like I looked at it and I was like, yeah, this is just totally fair. Like I'm gonna play 2-drops and 3-drops, and I have some interaction. The kind of deck that if I were just gonna go into the queue, I'd be like, yeah, I'll probably win 4 or 5 games with this deck. But I didn't feel confident, that it was gonna get me the 3 wins that I needed. And so it was a little disappointing. I ended up putting a Death from Above in my list. It's so bad. I know I'm gonna have to tell you guys what these cards do because this is never
I
gonna be
know
played
what
in
it is.
construction.
I know it's
Oh, I
bad.
know what that is too. I'm secretly a heavy drafter, although I haven't actually drafted in like 6 weeks. But I do love my draft.
That's something great about draft tournaments is that it's possible to just be thrust into a situation where you have to do something you're extremely uncomfortable with. Like if I just love Stone Scar and that's all I want, I can be a successful constructed player without ever breaking away from that. If you want to be a good drafter, you have to be so ridiculously flexible and adaptable and be able to cope with these situations. And I think that that is something that is absolutely beautiful in card games that, we just don't have unless we have more draft tournaments. So more draft tournaments, please, Darewolf. Thank you.
Explain to our audience, though, what Death from Above is and why it might not be a card you want to play in your draft deck.
If I may, if I could beg for more draft tournaments before I explain Death from Above, and here's why. Because I played Eternal just very casually. I'd play constructed just to get gold. I'd spend that gold on draft, and I would just do that for fun when I wasn't playing Magic. But when I read the announcement for the draft championship and like the automatic day 2 qualifier, even when I didn't know what the tournament structure was, I knew that was too good to pass up. And so that's when I started taking Eternal Draft more seriously. And since that has happened, I think I've written 6 or 7 Eternal Draft articles now. So I would say that draft championship has had a positive impact on getting more people to draft. I don't even want to say more serious drafters, because I think draft is great and everyone should play it. So I'm all for newer drafters. I'm all for people who are better at draft than me coming in and making the draft pool larger. So having the draft championship, like, I'm only one person, but I would not be here writing about Eternal, playing Eternal, as much as I am if I were not motivated by that draft championship. And that's what kind of led me to drafting more and kind of appreciating some of the depth that's in Eternal Draft that I wasn't giving it credit for before. So yeah, I wouldn't be here if not for the draft championship. I am planning already to qualify for day 2 of the 2021 draft championship or championships. So yeah, more draft tournaments would be awesome. And thank you. So Death from Above is it's 4 power. It's a primal. You can give a creature flying and berserk until the end of turn, or just flying and berserk. You only want to use it for 1 turn anyway. So I put this card in my deck because, like, I wasn't thinking of it in these terms at the time, but in terms of quadrant theory, like, I needed a way to break parity. Like, I was just going to play these totally fair games. I wasn't ramping out. I didn't have anything particularly busted. I wasn't drawing a bunch of cards. Like, I needed something to help break parity. And so I put a Death from Above in my deck. It almost worked out, but it didn't. But I drafted a fair deck, and I didn't lose anything busted. I lost to a Combray deck, and they went Caravan Guard turn 3, Auric Official turn 4. I think both games, and then obviously they did other things after that. But like that made the game really hard to win. Just those 2 commons back to back, turn 3, turn 4, and I lost game 1 to Smogwing Tinkers, and I lost game 2. All I can remember is that I Death from Above my Belching Behemoth, because that's how good my deck was. And I tried to kill my opponent for Xaxes for 12, and I was so proud of myself, and then they detained it, and then I lost. So
sounds like your opponent had a pretty boring deck.
Yeah, they did. Their boring deck was better than my boring deck. So that was my draft championship, and I lost those 2 games. And something that I think about a lot, one of my favorite episodes of Limited Resources has Ben Stark and Huey Jensen on it, and they talk about working hard, and a lot of it is, playing a ton of games. But Huey talks about how part of the quote unquote working hard is just grinding through the losses. Like, you could be the best player in the world, and you're just not going to win that many tournaments. And so I just played Huey saying that, like, in my head. Like, this was one tournament, and I was really, really excited, and I really would have liked for it to have gone well, but it just didn't work out this time, and I'll be really excited for the next one. And so I just sat at my table and just stared at it for like 5 minutes, and I let myself be really disappointed and unhappy about it. And then I tried to forget about it. And honestly, I don't even think I looked at my deck list again until I was preparing for this show, because I just kind of left it behind me. I just kind of tried to forget about it. Yeah, so that was my draft championship.
So the solution to, you can be the best player in the world and you won't always win every tournament. The solution to that is to have more draft tournaments, which is something that we keep on coming back to somehow. That was a lot of fun. I would love to participate in another one. Schaab, have you ever played in like the drafts at day 2 of a GP or like at a Pro Tour?
No, I've only played in one big, I guess I've played in 2. I played in a Star City Games team event, and I played in one Grand Prix Providence. I played in Ixalan Limited in Team Limited. So those are the only 2 like big events that I've done. So I haven't done a lot of high level drafting. I kind of
oh my goodness
came back to Magic.
Best of 3.
Came back to Magic.
High stakes drafting is the coolest thing in the world. It is like there's something on the line there's like a lot of adrenaline with regards to like winning and losing, and it's going to be different every time because it's draft. It's great. Would definitely love to see more of that.
We got to experience this, only 3 times in Eternal Best of 3 draft, and it's been phenomenal every time. Like the last time, I had multiple games where I almost decked out, and I had to crush my opponent before I was going to deck out, and it was great. Yeah, so so for Schaab doesn't know, but I packed. I don't think you remember. I don't think you listened, but I packed one, pick one Jotun Bonebreaker, and it might look Jotun Bonebreaker is a 5 primal 5/5 overwhelm that says Surge, discard a card, a random draw a card, and then if you discard 10 cards, it gets +10/+1. It really looks like at first like a Sage of Sands, right? That's what it looks like. It looks like a 5/5 that has an ability, but it's a lot better than that because if you have no cards in hand and you play your last card as a power, you just get to draw a free card, and so that just shuffled through my deck. But yeah, so the one thing I want to mention is there is a difference between drafting on regular ladder and drafting in both day 1 and day 2 of the draft event. Specifically, I can't really speak for day 1 of it because I didn't draft on day 1, but on day 2, there are a couple of key differences. One is like what Schaab said, where you really want to go for the win, right? Like getting 3-0 in this day is way more important than getting, the 5-3, right? Like getting the 7-0 is super important here because right, you want to get to the top 8, you want to get to the top 4. So throwing that death from above into your draft deck and making sure you have a way to win the game and, just be able to spike and just like, I'm just going to slip through my opponent, like I don't deserve to win this game, but I'm going to win it anyways. Having that access is very important. Another interesting thing is that you can, or at least in the last draft we had, you could kind of sideboard actually. I was actually reminded by Schaab's articles to draft the hard way, and so I did that during that tournament. But I ended up with having very few extra playables. But the interesting thing is that aside from round 1, you got to know who your opponent was before each round, right? So you got to see their pool. So like I almost did this, but I messed up and didn't. But one of the cards I had in my pool, I was a boring Elysian deck, but like a very good boring Elysian deck. Like I was the best 8 out of 10 deck you've ever seen in draft. Like I had 3 Blur Haze Worms, a Torgov, a Jotun Bonebreaker, just like a very solid deck. And so one of the things that happened though in game 2 is I was playing against Neil, and Neil had a bunch of X1s in their deck. And so I could have put Ice Bow into my deck before the match started. I ended up thinking about like the very last second. I didn't do it, and I wish I had because it would have been a very like big brain galaxy brain move. But like in these draft tournaments, if they happen again, where you get to see the draft pools, you can draft sideboard cards and look at their pool. Like draft like make sure you draft a Ruin even if you don't have a market card. And if your opponent has like a Grodov bird and like a Permafrost, be like, I'm just gonna put this Ruin into my main deck before the match starts because you get to know these things. So like there is an interesting difference between day 2 drafting with open pools and on ladder drafting.
Well, geez, I don't think that part of the game should exist. I don't think you should be able to adapt to your opponent's decks if you, by seeing their pools. I feel like your deck should be pretty much set by that point. I that's not an aspect of the game that I think brings a whole lot to it.
I mean, not necessarily, but like again, like the big thing is like if you don't have a market, but you can still put in the Ruins main deck. I mean, the fact that it exists means it's something you have to be aware of.
I guess, but like I feel like that's something that they would get rid of. Yeah, like I don't think that's something that's intended.
So yeah, I mean, aside from that, the main difference is that sometimes you have to sneak these like death. I mean, I also think Death from Above is actually not it's a terrible draft card, but it's not Gorgon Cutthroat level of bad. Let's put it that way.
Even Gorgon Cutthroat has its day sometimes. Like
Gorgon Cutthroat is like my least favorite card in Eternal. You take that back, Sonny.
If you are lacking on the cards to play on your opponent's turn and you have a bunch of Blur Haze Worms, you're going to play Gorgon Cutthroat. Look, another beautiful thing about draft is that you have to know when to use every part of the Buffalo, right? You have to know when you got to play that terrible card, that Death from Above, that Gorgon Cutthroat, that whatever the 6 cost 6/4 is. There are going to be times when that is the best option for you, and you have to be able to realize that. Anyway, drafting is like so incredibly difficult, and in order to do it right, you have to be so disciplined about it, and you really have to do things the hard way. And the worst part about it is that, like with a lot of other things that are really bringing you from being a good player to a great player, I think it takes a long time to be able to see tangible results. You're talking about raising your average win percentage, not just doing something to fix up a mistake or something here and there. You're talking about something that will gradually increase your win percentage, and that is something that you only see after you've done it a lot, but it's well worth it.
And I want to, something that I don't want to forget to say, because I don't think that I did a great job of making this point when I discussed it earlier. But if we're talking about constructed, and people will say like, oh, the gameplay is brainless, or when you talk about draft and people say like, oh, the rares are all that matters. It's not just that I think that mindset is incorrect. I mean, I do think it's incorrect, but that's not why I kind of argue against it. I think you're depriving yourself of like the most fun aspect of this game, or one of the things that is the most fun, which is finding those ways to get better at it. I think that a lot of people kind of reach a ceiling because let's just be honest, that people who enjoy Magic and people who enjoy Eternal, like there's a lot of smart people who play these games, and it's the same skills that allow these people to be good. The fact that they're smart, that they have great cognitive skills, that also limits how good they can be, because they think that they are done learning from other people, which is nonsense. Like even if you're excellent, Torolf Severin recently won a Pro Tour. He talked about this on an episode of Limited Resources, how he was much better than, by all objective, subjective measurements, a better Magic player than this other person, but they knew how to draft this one archetype. And so he picked their brain for how to do that. And then that was like a tool that he had in his toolbox. So if you look at these games as, I don't understand why people are playing them if they think their decisions don't matter. But if you look at it as the gameplay of constructed is brainless, or that in limited the rares are all that matters, I think you are really limiting your enjoyment of the game. And it's not like every time I lose, I'm like, oh, well, what a great learning experience. Let's turn around and see what I can gather from this. Like there are times where it's just terrible. Like, and I play and my wife needs to like tell me to take a break because I am so clearly not learning anything or having a good time. But finding those small edges after you make all the big leaps, you learn about 2-for-1s, and then you have to find ways to separate yourself from good to great, and then from great to excellent. And so, yeah, it's not just the rares that matters. And in constructed, I don't think it's that the gameplay is brainless. I think that people, when they get that in their heads, they stop improving, and I would imagine the game is much less fun
Yeah.
if you view it that way.
Schaab, were you
So
around for the whole TDC drama involving me?
For the what drama?
The TDC drama? This was like a couple of years ago at this point.
Oh, no. So
yeah, I'm not going to go too far into it, but like basically, I think what it comes down to is like people are writing off I had a pick order that I published about how good I think cards are relative. And I mean, like, it's so subjective. You can't just follow this pick order and expect to have the best draft deck you could have picked up, but like it's there for the people that need it. And these people are just like paying no heed to it. And like whenever people make draft, like when people are talking about picking cards in draft especially, or building a deck in draft, I always want to know more about people's processes for why they choose a card, even though I might think it's not, like if I think it's clearly not the right thing to do. Like there's a lot to be gained of learning other people's perspectives, even if you think they're wrong, and not just shutting them down. And that's basically what was happening to me. Anyway, yeah, like, well, I could go on and on about this, but like, I just think that it's so important to learn from other people, especially when you disagree, because that's when you're able to, make the adjustment and get better. And I guess I talked about that during my Everybody is Trash episode.
Well, one thing that you mentioned in the Everybody is Trash episode is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
And I actually, it's weird for me to even think that I've reached this point in my life, but I can give the perspective, like as somebody who actually is an expert in a field, I can tell you why this happens. It's because so I have been in my professional career for 5 years, and and it's in a very specialized area that not many people are in. And so when you compare me to the world's population, I am an expert in this particular area, but I feel like I know nothing. Like I feel like there's just so much more for me to learn, and there's so many things that I don't know. So if that's how I feel about this area, this topic that I have spent so many years of my life studying, how could I possibly speak with certainty on any other topic?
Yeah.
I don't even feel like an expert in the thing I'm actually an expert in. So am I going to go and say like, I'm 100% sure that this card is better than this one? No, I'm not. Like, I think that everything exists on a gradient. Cards are good sometimes, cards are bad sometimes. But when it comes to, yes, people who are not experts will speak with an authority that is not justified. But that's why the Dunning-Kruger effect is. People don't know what they don't know. And when you do become an actual expert in an area, you don't feel like it. Like, so I don't feel like I could possibly be an expert on limited or speak with authority on anything else. I barely feel like I can speak with authority on the thing I actually can speak with authority on.
Just
As
like they
somebody-
say in Pocahontas, you'll learn things you never knew. Words to live by.
As somebody who has 77% in every category across every metric, I have an accurate measurement of myself in everything.
Is that just nonsense? Is that more
No.
Stormblessed?
Okay. So that's a Dunning-Kruger joke, because like the joke is that there are people who can actually accurately represent their own worth in a field, right? And that's around like 72, 78%. And that's only because by random chance, that's just how the distribution falls, right? It's like you just happen to get lucky with how you view yourself, just because that's just randomly how it works out.
Oh, okay.
It's a deep cut of a joke.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a little deep for me. Schaab, I'm curious if your field that you're actually an expert in is one that people generally think that they're very good at and just aren't.
Ooh, good question.
My field is highly specialized, but so no, people don't generally.
Okay.
I specialize in, but what I can tell you, because a lot of what I do is consult. So I work with device users, so nonverbal individuals, like Stephen Hawking used a device. That's an AAC device. Those are the kind of things that I specialize in.
Oh, okay.
And so, but when you talk about how, if you're going to have a discussion with somebody about which card is better in a Kira deck, you just have to listen. People don't listen, and I do consult a lot for my job.
Oh
and,
my god!
And I can
so
tell, and I can tell you, the people who don't listen are the smartest people. The smartest people are the ones. Yeah, they don't listen. Like they get it in their heads that they're right. Like trust me, this mindset of improvement. Let me be very careful about how I say this. Some of the people who have great cognitive skills, they can do math very easily, spell very easily. They kind of get it in their head that they're the smartest person in the room, and they can stop listening. That they don't really have anything to learn. And it's kind of the same thing when you think that the gameplay is brainless, that you're like, well, I don't have anything left to learn. You should still listen, because you're wrong. So you should still listen. And if you disagree with what the person says, you just consider it and then forget about it. People have a very strong desire to argue things just to be right, and I don't understand that at all.
Wait, that's actually an insane point. Like the people that are very smart just don't listen, and that's like the opposite of what you need to do in a card game to succeed. Oh man, I need to run that by some people that are very good at card games and are very smart and like have a lot of experience, and see what they say about it, because that's just like a viewpoint that I had never considered previously. That's really interesting.
It's people who, when I do consult for most people, they listen, but there are some people that you run into like, well, I'll explain to them, my point of view as a professional in my area. And they'll be like, well, I'm a doctor. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't at all. Being an expert in one area does not make you an expert in all. It actually makes you much worse in other areas, because it took you focus so much of your life on that one on that one area. But yeah, I think a lot of like really smart people, the same thing that sets their floor in these games, they pick it up. They're really good at it. I think it's those same cognitive skills that set their ceiling. If you're not open to being wrong, if you're not a good scientist, be a good scientist. Like, have your opinions, be open to being wrong when you're presented with newer, better information.
Yeah.
Well, as someone that's in training to be a scientist, I can tell you that sentence has a lot more complications than you might think, as far as being a good scientist is concerned.
Well, now I know why Steve Jobs died of cancer, because he thought he was the smartest person in the room and didn't listen to what his doctor said. Anyway,
right.
I think we've been going on for like a little over an hour now. I think we do need to wrap it up, but it was great having you, Schaab. You brought a lot of great insights that, Stormblessed and I are great. There's nothing wrong with that, but like having an outside having outside insights that are really enlightened, I think adds a lot to the show. So thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it was a great time. I had a really good time. If you guys ever want to talk about draft or limited again, please just let me know. I don't think I'll be able to add much to constructed, but I will say, like, I practice what I preach. Like, I'm going to, my wife is due the first week of November, so I'm going to hope to play in some events during the Eternal celebration, and I'm going to plan to play 0 of them. But like, if there's a Throne tournament and it's going to qualify me for Worlds, yeah, I'm going to queue up with a Throne deck, and I am just going to go into the Friends of Eternal Discord and ask Sunny probably what I should play, and then I'm going to ask everyone what's important to know, because I'm a smart person. I don't have the time to figure all these things out, nor do I need to figure all these things out by myself. I just go like, oh, hey, Sunny, like what's going on with this list? Tell me about this market, and tell me, like, I could take Sunny's list and probably play for 20 hours and figure all those things out, or I could just ask him.
Yeah.
Or that. So, and that's much easier. So that is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to say like, hey, what is the best deck in the format? Can you give me some tips? And then that's what I'm going to do. So the
What?
Oh no, he's gone. If you're wondering what happened out there, listeners, Schaab somehow got dropped from our Discord call. In any case, be sure to check out Schaab's articles at letstalklimited.wordpress.com. I don't advertise content that often, but I think this stuff is really worth reading, especially if you're into limited.
And if you really want to, you can also check out some of his articles on Eternal Warcry as well, if you are more comfortable on that site.
Yes. And everyone, let's wish Stormblessed a good luck for this upcoming weekend, because you're about to play the most important match of your life. Just one match with all the marbles on the line. So best of luck. Get a good night's sleep. Eat your vegetables. Play tight. Play slowly.
Yeah, slow down. You also mentioned that in one of your level up episodes. Slow down.
Schaab's back just in time for the sign up. All right, thanks everyone for listening. Best of luck out there for you guys drafting, and we will be back with probably more constructed talk as we get closer to the Eternal Celebration and the Last Chance qualifiers. So thanks for listening again, and until next time, we will see you in the friend zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels, all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the friend zone.
Yeah, be boring. I never thought I'd be associated with those 2 words, but I guess that's going to be like my brand now.
Congratulations.
You've changed brand. The boring.